Well, power prices have been going up, and unfortunately, it looks like there is no relief in sight, despite promises to the contrary from the newly minted Labor federal government. We haven't seen the relief that we were promised, we have instead seen another round of increases. And that seems to be likely to continue as the mix of energy continues to move towards unreliable, non dispatchable renewables in the form of wind and solar, especially. But this begs a massive question. Why are we, the only inhabited continent on Earth, yet to make good and proper use of nuclear power? Someone who would like to see us making better use of nuclear power, or at the very least have it available as one of the options in the mix, is the Libertarian Party MP in Victoria, David Limbrick. He joins me now to have a discussion. David, welcome to the show. You've actually introduced a bill into the Victorian Parliament to try and repeal the Victorian state government prohibition on nuclear power. Where's that up to?
Yeah, so for those viewers who aren't aware, Victoria has like a special prohibition on nuclear energy and what they call nuclear activities, which was implemented back in the 1980s in 1983, and this effectively prohibits exploration for any radioactive materials. It prohibits any participation in the nuclear fuel supply chain, and it prohibits nuclear reactors. And so what I did today is introduced a bill into Parliament and read in a speech associated with that bill, which effectively repeals that prohibition.
Now, that's available on your social media. Anyone can go to your David Limbrick MP Facebook page, for example, and hear that speech. It's a curious thing to me that we even had this additional layer of prohibition. I mean, nuclear energy has been outlawed essentially at a federal level for some time anyway. Is there any particular rationale for Victoria having its own legislation on this?
Okay, so what you'll hear from many people who are passionate about energy policy is, they want to lower carbon emissions, they want to do all of these things. But as you would well know, Topher, whatever Australia does, even if it shut down its entire economy and shut down all carbon emissions, and you believed everything that people say about, climate change, Australia is nothing more than a rounding error
Mm-hmm.
on scheme of things, right? And I know that you know that very well.
Mm.
And what they're really doing with all this push for renewables and all these things is it's sending a signal to the rest of the world that we're doing our part, that we're, nice people, that we're good people, and this sort of thing. And my alternative view is maybe we could send a different signal to the rest of the world that would be free, that were open minded about all technology sources, all energy technologies,
Mm.
including nuclear.
Mm.
And I think that repealing our nuclear prohibitions, our nuclear activity prohibitions in Victoria would send a strong signal to the rest of the country and to the rest of the world that, we're open-minded about these things. And I feel, as a secondary thing, one of the big problems at the moment in Victoria is that we're limiting ourselves through this act. You would know that through the AUKUS deal, we're going to have nuclear submarines soon,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, why would anyone do anything to do with nuclear submarines in a state that has prohibited everything to do with the nuclear
Nuclear
fuel supply
activity.
chain?
Mm.
I would love Victoria to have a slice of that action. Now, whether or not you like the submarines, that's a separate matter.
Sure.
But um, regardless, it's just a really good example of how this antiquated legislation that was brought in 1983 is affecting the economy and the opportunities for Victoria today.
Mm. Well, coming back to the energy specific issue, it's extraordinary to me. You mentioned concerns over anthropogenic sources of carbon dioxide. The concentration of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere has gone from around about 380 parts per million to I think it's a bit over 420 parts per million now. We're told that this is a really dangerous thing. We're told that this is causing a climate disaster. In fact, what are they calling it now? Global boiling. It seems to me that nuclear should be on the tip of everyone's tongue, especially if they're concerned about carbon dioxide emissions. Why isn't this being put forward, for example, by the Greens?
I don't think they really want solutions. I don't think they're actually serious about this. If they were serious and about global boiling and about the world falling apart and entering this new, catastrophic era of climate change,
Mm,
of course they would want every technology on the table, but they don't.
mm,
They make up all these excuses why they don't want to use this technology, and nuclear technology is, clearly one of the safest forms of energy production that humanity has ever produced. And I have other concerns with like what they're doing with renewables, right? So people talk about renewables, this progression towards a zero carbon economy. Whether or not you think that's a good thing is a separate matter, but we're doing it, right? We're doing that regardless of whether you like it or not. And the what they're really doing is setting us up for perpetual dependence on foreign countries like China, giving us these cheap, trading with us these cheap renewables. And it's not like we're going to just have it all built out and then that's it. It's going to be a perpetual thing because every 20, 30 years they have to be replaced. And my view is that we have massive uranium resources, and we can, even get it from seawater if we needed to. But we've got more than enough uranium to power us, forever. We have excellent universities in Victoria that can train scientists and physicists and everyone that we need to run these plants. We have excellent tradesmen like welders and electricians who were working at coal power plants in the Latrobe Valley.
Sure.
They can be retrained to work at a nuclear power plant, high-paying jobs, very high-tech jobs. And nuclear power plants in the US, they're being licensed to run for 80 years. This is a long-term thing, and I think, I'm really optimistic about Victoria. I want us to have all sorts of opportunities, and I think that we're just like writing ourselves out of so many opportunities by this prohibition.
Well, there are, of course, groups that see it very, very differently. I've got here just a part of the website from Environment Victoria, not actually a government body as much as you might make that mistake. They are a private charity and they're obviously very anti-nuclear. They call it an unnecessary risk, and their very first point here is that nuclear power is dangerous. They cite Fukushima, they cite Chernobyl, and they cite Long Island, or 3 Mile Island. These so-called disasters, obviously, they were serious incidents. But you mentioned before that nuclear energy is the safest form of energy. We have that in data. We can measure the number of lives lost per megawatt hour of energy produced by any of these sources. And nuclear is the safest by far. How is it that there are people who can have the reality, the data, so precisely backwards on this issue?
They're scaremongering. And I would say I used to be anti-nuclear, and what changed my mind on nuclear energy, and I've spoken about this a few times, was actually the Fukushima disaster.
Right.
So, not many people realize how many people died from, radiation or radiation exposure in Fukushima, and the answer is zero. And now, when Fukushima happened, I was very, very concerned. I've got, my family's Japanese. I've got lots of friends and family in Japan. And of course, I was worried, like when I saw what happened. The tsunami itself was awful. But when you see, the lid blow off a nuclear reactor, of course you worry. And of course, I was thinking, you see all these weird measurements and stuff on television. They talk about becquerels and all this sort of stuff. And so I started researching and figuring out, well, just how much danger is my family and friends in? And when I went into it in detail, what I discovered is that I would have gotten more natural radiation from cosmic radiation on the plane on a trip to Japan than I would have gotten in Japan from a nuclear reactor exploding. Yep. And that made me totally rethink my thinking around nuclear energy and what it actually means. And you look at the data, you mentioned yourself, if you think about the amount of energy, like in terms of terawatt hours, how many people die in terms of terawatt hours for every type of energy production, nuclear is pretty much the safest form of energy production that humanity has ever produced. So this argument about safety, it's just ridiculous, I think.
Well, David Limbrick, MLC, member for the Southern Metropolitan Region with the Libertarian Party in Victoria, thank you so much for coming on. I wish you Godspeed with this bill. I have been longing for over a decade now to see some common sense come into this debate around nuclear energy, and I certainly hope to see this prohibition lifted. And thank you for coming once again onto the Aussie Wire.
Thanks for having me.